All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are about ready to begin. Everybody got a fresh cocktail?
Oh, yeah.
I always say, history always goes down better with a cocktail.
Yes, indeed.
All righty. Well, we will get started with our little intro video.
What is about? It's something you want. When they come, the world keeps revolving. That the revolution's near. But to me, it seems quite clear. It's all just a little bit of Peter.
All righty. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to YesterQueer, the Tarrant County LGBTQ History Project. Thank you guys for braving the unbelievably awful freaking heat out there to join us in the nice, cool lap of Liberty Lounge. My name's Todd Camp. I'm the director of YesterQueer. Thank you guys for coming out. If you haven't had a chance, please check out the mini exhibit that we've got up front. We've got some incredible buttons documenting a great deal of history back to the, I would say, 50s and 60s even. So, which is incredible. And then Adrian's brought some amazing buttons. And then we have also the complete YesterQueer archive of buttons. So, and I thank you guys. I've seen several people have worn their buttons, which is awesome. I've seen some very cool ones that I've not seen before. So thank you guys for wearing those for us. But also just a couple of housekeeping things. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, you can do that. We'll also have a QR code at the end. And as always, this is a casual discussion. So I don't want this to sound like a lecture. You guys can raise your hand if you have questions, if you have thoughts, you have ideas you want to pass along. Feel free to do so anytime throughout. We do have a microphone over there because it'd be great if you could use the microphone. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll get you the microphone. That way everybody can hear it in digital world, because we are broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube. So hello to everyone out there. If you'd like more information about YesterQueer, or you want to sign up for the newsletter or learn how to volunteer, like I said, you can do that at the end of the presentation. With that, welcome to Wearable History, how button culture helped define LGBTQ life while defining the mainstream. My guest tonight is Adrian Cardwell. Adrian is the executive director of Badge of Pride, a new nonprofit organization dedicated to activating queer history and inspiring activism. After more than 27 years in executive positions, Adrian left corporate life during COVID-19 pandemic to pursue purpose-driven work. He lives in Oak Cliff with his husband, Aaron, and their menagerie of 2 dogs, 1 cat, and 7 chickens. You can also catch him worldwide on his weekly radio program, Cardwell's Cove, the Space Age Luau. Please welcome Adrian Cardwell, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hear it for him.
Hi there. Good to be here with you all, and thanks for turning out. Yeah, I mean, what a blistery hot day, but welcome to the wind tunnel here. This is great. I'm very appreciative of the fans blowing in here.
Absolutely. How many people here, this is their first time at YesterQueer? Just curious. All right, we got some virgins in the audience. Awesome. So like I said, anytime you have a question, you want to raise your hand, just let us know, and we will call on you. So as to get started, I'd like to know a little bit more about Badge of Pride, and I'm sure everyone here would. So Adrian, could you tell us a little bit about what exactly Badge of Pride is?
Sure, be happy to. So Badge of Pride is a new 501c3 organization. We just got our recognition from the IRS in April. So
Congrats.
that is
still working on ours. Yeah,
the long, arduous road of getting that certification. But this was really kind of born out of a personal passion project. So I'm a little bit of a collector, borderline hoarder, but we won't talk about that. My husband will, but
I can't relate.
but I really sort of started as I was in the previous roles that I had in corporate world, I would traveled extensively, almost constantly, and just started to having a whole lot of conversations with um, activists and our community elders, and those conversations turned into learning sessions, and then eventually we started. They just started handing me these precious things, and I'm like, "What is this?" But the bug, I caught the bug in, I would say, the presidential election of 1992. That was actually my first presidential election that I was old enough to vote in. And I wasn't out at the time, but as a way of coming out to myself, I went to a rally for Bill Clinton, and I found a gay men and lesbian women for Clinton Gore 92 button. And that was the first one. And from there, it just snowballs. Whoops. And then, there we go. And so it just has grown to a point of there are 10,000 of these things right now in my house, which also my husband laments, and I do too at times. But it was, sort of, it got to the question of, so what? So you have all of these things; these are very important things. So what? And I think the catalyst for me was, after I had left the corporate life in 2020, and it was 2021 when the Texas legislature passed a bill. And very discreetly tucked into this provision was a prohibition on students interacting with their elected officials. And I was like, what the F? I don't know if we're all adults here, but I'm fuck. Yeah. What the fuck is this?
He means fuck is what he meant.
And so that was really like okay, gotta get on this thing. But so I'm going to take it back just a little while, and that was a little brief kind of take there. But I do have to give one shout out. So I mentioned that's my husband over there. Today is also our anniversary.
Oh wow! Congratulations.
So if you know if you note the date there, 2014. So we've been married for 9 years. That was almost a full year before the federal government. So we got married in the state of Illinois. We got married in Chicago. And a fabulous ceremony. We had the Chicago theater sign right outside. It was special. But anyway, but it would take almost a full year for this picture to happen, right? For the state of Texas to recognize that we were married. And that was also a what the fuck moment. But that was also, I remember seeing that, and I still get emotional. So that date sticks with me pretty tremendously. And then seeing the White House lit up like that had never felt so validated in all of my life. It took a simple act. And if you've read Becoming by Michelle Obama, or you've heard her talk about it, the story of her and the daughter sort of sneaking out from the White House, away from the Secret Service. So they were being very naughty to get out so they could see this thing, and just a fabulous thing. But anyway, I digress a little bit. I wanted to mark the anniversary, but let's get into what it is we do here. So let's start with Badge of Pride, right? Let's start with just a definition of pride. And you can see it there, right? It's confidence, it's self-respect by a group of people that have been socially, officially, and legally marginalized on the basis of who they are. Do we know anybody like that in this room? Right? We've been that, right? We still are that in many, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. 500 bills almost introduced in state legislatures around this country just this year alone. And that fucking pisses me off, right? And so that is the anger and the passion with which we kind of approach this, right? how do we inspire action? And so you think back to these buttons, and we'll talk more about the ones that I brought with me today and what their meaning were in time. But I think it's important to start with this definition, right? That we are exactly this, right? And so when we talk about pride, we think about pride as a big corporate sponsored party, VIP band, that shit. That's not what it was. That's not the spirit of pride. And that's what Badge of Pride wants to get to the heart of. And so our mission is to collect and activate artifacts from queer history to inform, enrich, and engage the contemporary queer experience. Right? So that's one sentence. It says a lot there, right? But it's about taking these things from the past. How do we learn from the past? But then also, what the hell do we do with them today? What are the lessons that we need to be learning today? That's what this is about. Not just telling history, but it's the so what. We want to get to the so what. And so some of the things that we do, our work is going to be, again, we're very, very new, but our work is threefold, right? So one is building exhibitions, to build something that is immersive and compelling and informative. And by the time you walk out of there, you're thinking, what can I go do? And so I actually had a meeting earlier today. We have a museum here in the DFW area. We are on their calendar for a 3-month exhibition that will run from Pride Month 2025. And I'll tell you about why it's so far away in just a minute. 2025 through Queer History Month, October 2025. So this will be here a full 3 months. And so we're very, very excited about that. The conversations that we're starting now are state level funding for this first exhibition that will be here in DFW, and that we will be partnering with organizations from around the state, because Todd, you've got things that I'm like, oh, that needs to be in this exhibit. I know that the Dallas Way folks and the folks at UNT have got some tremendous stuff as well.
Absolutely.
And it's like, let's bring these tremendous artifacts out. Let's activate them. Let's put them in a space where people can see them and engage with them today. Well, not today, it'll be in 2 years, but also, so the exhibitions will be the first kind of big work that we'll be doing. We'll be working on some pop-up exhibitions, maybe a little more formal than what we're doing today. We haven't figured out exactly what that's going to look like. But then getting into adult education. So we're talking more in depth about queer history, bringing activists to come and teach us their lessons. And also to give everybody the tools, because, and we'll get to this in a second, as I mentioned earlier, we're not teaching civics, right? And adults, we'll get to the kids, but adults don't know necessarily how to petition their government. And when something is fucked up, what do you do about it? How do you do it? How do you talk to Ted Cruz besides what you kind of want to do, right?
I got a few choices.
So working on, so through the context of history to bring action, give people the tools to go do that. And then working on youth education in terms of filling the gap in civics education, teaching about intersectionality at a young age, what that means, what that looks like. And so that we're creating informed and passionate citizens, right? Because that's what that bill was designed to do, right? If people don't feel that they have the tools and the capacity and the know-how to talk to their elected leaders, that's exactly what they want. They don't want people to talk to them about things they don't want to, that they don't want to talk about. So that's the rough, that's a quick view of what it is that we're wanting to do. That's a brief origin. we had our first fundraiser here last month for Give Out Day, and raised some initial kind of seed cash there. So that's great. So we want to keep taking these things out and spreading the word. Yeah, so I think we can. Oh yeah. Oh, here we go. That's the setup on Badge of Pride.
All right. Did anybody have any questions about Badge of Pride before we move on?
Mhm.
Yeah. Or is it a secret?
It's I want to wait until we've got a grant that says yes, so we've got some funding coming. But I will say the institution is almost smack dab in between Dallas and Fort Worth.
Ah.
And it is affiliated with the Smithsonian. So they bring Smithsonian exhibits in.
I know what it is.
And it's a great facility. But I do want to hang tight until I've got a grant that says, yeah, we're going to write you a check for it. And then it also goes before the city council in the budget planning process in February of 2024. And the reason that we're kind of pushing it to 2025 is twofold. One, the leaders were like, ooh, next year, that's an election year. People are already riled up.
Yeah.
Last thing you want to do is let's throw some more fire on it. But the real and true reason is the funding cycle to get into the flow for grants is very long. And so knowing that from day one, the artists and activists that we bring on to build the exhibit and to contribute to the exhibit, that everybody gets paid and they get paid fairly. And that is from the beginning of this organization that we want to instill, is that people get paid for their contribution to the work. And so I have to get into the grant cycle for that. So that's the main reason for the big, long delay.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Just out of curiosity, so when you first started, you got the button, those were free. Were you, was it something that as a fellow collector, I don't know what it is, what spark hits you that makes you go, I have to have everything of this. Was it something about the pins themselves? Because I'm sure you hadn't envisioned this organization or what to do with it, but you were just charmed by the idea of, oh my God, there's so many buttons about LGBTQ history. I have to have them all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it did kind of verge into that territory. Mm-hmm. And so when I would look at them, I was like, yes, Marie Kondo, they do bring me joy, damn it.
No,
they do.
Shut up.
I assure you, they do. But really, one of the things that I realized, and this is sort of the aw shucks moment, right, is I realize I'm holding these things in my hand, and it's in the title of this session tonight. This is history, right? People wore these things to say something, and for queer people that meant a lot. It meant life and death. In for a significant period of time. And in the early days, it meant you had to be accepting of yourself enough to wear one of these things so that somebody else could see it. And so when I realized that these things, and then of course all the protests and the marches, and you think the emotion and the power behind these tiny little things, that's what sparked it for me. And that's was like, this, there's a story here, and the story has to be told. Mm-hmm. And that's what I wanted to get to the work of trying to figure out is, okay, let me do the little hoarding thing for a little bit, but then eventually, what do I do with it?
Right.
Yeah. I've caught the car, I'm the dog that caught the car. Now what? Right. So
on that point, tell us a little bit about, pins have been with us for, I'm not sure exactly how far back they go, but I know they've been around for hundreds, I guess, years.
Well,
maybe almost hundreds.
Yeah, not as we know them. So, that's a perfect segue. So we get into kind of the origin of the pin as we know it today. So the pin, these pins, this patent was first made in 1896. And so they really kind of first made their first appearance in the presidential election of that year, which is William McKinley and William Jennings Bryan. Who the hell knows who that is, right? There you go. This guy. But that first
Billy Mack. Yeah,
election was the first time, because before then, yeah, you had beautiful pins that were all metal. And they were like brooches, or they would be like lapel studs, right? And they would all be metal. They had to be smelted and sort of, there was a lot of work. And so this technology allowed for a lot of buttons to be made in rapid period of time. And then you could just turn them around. You could just crank these things out. So 1896 was the first time you really saw them in any meaning. Well, that's when they were patented. And then that first presidential election. And then so you think about the events that followed, right? You had the Spanish-American War, and then you had Remember the Maine pins that were issued. Then you get into women's suffrage, and you get into prohibition, early on. And then of course, World War I. And then so you think about like women's suffrage, and I've got two teeny tiny examples here, but so the phrase "votes for women" and "deeds not words" were kind of the primary slogans of the women's suffrage movement that really kind of gained traction on these buttons. But I also have here an example of one that's in the Badge of Pride collection that was opposed to it. So think about that.
No.
You had to feel so passionately to deny somebody else rights that you would wear a thing on your person and walk around with it in public. Can you imagine that?
So these pins were very similar. I mean, for those of you who don't know, the pin backs.
Yep.
And I think these early ones, they were metal, and so they just had that bent.
It'd be like a straight pin.
Yeah, it was like a circular pin thing that stuck inside of it.
Yeah, and that was before we had tetanus shots and all that stuff.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Watch out. Yeah. As I have gone through the box, sometimes I'm like, ooh, I'm glad I had a tetanus shot.
Had to be willing to die for your.
Yeah, that's right. But then you really see a very strong play in the civil rights movement on buttons, right? So those amazing slogans like "I am a man" and "We shall overcome," right? That led a movement. You saw these things everywhere. And so we have an example of one there. You can also imagine, flip side, there's one down there that was, nope, never, right? Again, that's the thing. You want to deny somebody's rights so much that you'll wear this thing in public on your body. That just is remarkable to me. So it runs the gamut. So even in the Badge of Pride collection, there are, I've got a whole amount of anti-gay ones, right? So one man, one woman.
Oh man, you can clean up at a Trump rally.
Yeah, exactly. Just nasty stuff during the AIDS crisis. And just really kind of hurtful things to see. But I mean, they're important for us because this is the thing that's like, when your dog makes a mess and you got to rub their nose in it. Sometimes that's what we need, right? And so that's part of why we have those unsavory items in the collection as well. So yeah, so that's just a brief history of the pinback.
So when did the first real symbols of queer identity begin to surface? So you really started to see them in 1970. That's really kind of the big kind of turn. Right after Stonewall.
But yeah, right after Stonewall. But we can go back even further. There were a lot of subtle ways that queer people communicated to each other that, hey, I'm one. Are you one too? And that really kind of got underway with the Green Carnation and Oscar Wilde. And so he had a premiere of his play, Lady Windermere's Fan. Oh, look, here's an example right here. There we are.
Carnation, nice.
He asked some of his friends to wear a green carnation on their lapel, and then that sort of caught on. And then when he was being persecuted, supporters in the community started wearing green carnations, and that way you would kind of know each other from afar.
When did do you know the origin of the sunflower with him? Particularly in ridicule of him, they would always caricatures at the time would always draw wearing a giant sunflower.
Yeah, that I don't know.
That
And
was
I
something
wonder
that
if it's
just-
kind of a take on.
Yeah, I think it was
this.
meant to like parody the carnation, but
Yeah,
I remember
yeah.
I was like, I don't know why the sunflower. But
Right. Well, and so you think about that, and so we've got the green carnation here, but then also there's these lovely violets, right? Oh well, first we'll get to that in a second, but really our first symbol that was really sort of widely adopted was the lambda, and that was adopted in 1970 by the Gay Activist Alliance in New York, and that's really where it caught on. And so when you look back at the display, you will see some of the very first ones that were ever issued by the GAA in New York. And then it caught on, and it was, I mean, it still is a symbol for our community. And it's really about unity under oppression, right? And so that was our first significant way that also in a non-text way to be able to identify each other.
Right.
Yeah. But these lovely violets here, right? The violets have been associated with lesbians since the time of Sappho. And while the flower themselves may not necessarily be as associated today, but the color certainly is. And so that has remained with us. And then also the Labrys, I don't think I found any immediately when I was pulling these together, but the Labrys was a great symbol that was adopted in the 70s as well amongst the lesbian community. So it's a great thing to see there. Let's see. Oh, and then of course, the pink triangle, right? Taking a symbol of oppression and death and turning it around, right? Claiming that as our own. And that really as a community, we really picked that up in about 1978, 1977, as in the Anita Bryant campaign was kicking in, right? And she and the people in her circle, they were hell-bent on, they're like, hey, Miami-Dade, Minneapolis, Eugene, Oregon, they have given special rights to the gay community.
So
yeah,
put a pin in that real quick.
Yeah.
How many people know who Anita Bryant is? I know I've explained to a few people, but so Anita Bryant was a former Miss America. She was a gospel singer. She was very popular. She had been hired as the spokesperson for the Florida Orange Association.
That's right.
And then for some reason, I know that the right is fond of calling us groomers, and people are like, I can't believe this new thing where they're calling us groomers. It's like, oh no.
Oh no.
Anita was the original.
Yeah.
We're groomers. But she called it the Save the Children crusade. But yes, go on.
Yeah, no, and I will tell you, you pull up old videos of Anita Bryant and Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, and you could play almost verbatim
Absolutely
the things that you're hearing in state legislatures today.
Almost
verbatim are you hearing those same words. And so as a stand, we reclaimed this symbol of our death and oppression and turned it around into a symbol of pride. And so you'll see back there also, you'll see two buttons that are from that period. One is the pink triangle with Never Again on it, was issued during that time. And then you'll see one back there that says, remember Buchenwald and remember Miami-Dade, right? And that was also issued during that time. And so that's when we really kind of reclaimed the symbol. ACT UP used it tremendously and powerfully starting in 1987. And so there's also a selection of ACT UP buttons back there that you can see it kind of prominently displayed. And
this was something that we've become pretty well known for. Symbols of oppression against us, we have managed to turn that around. We've reclaimed pretty much every word they've ever used against us. So that it kind of takes the sting out. You'll see some buttons over there that say have the word fag or faggot or whatever. It's just like there are a lot of words that we've reclaimed for ourselves. Gay being one of them as well.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you think of that's the coping mechanism of gay humor is to take your oppression, turn it around, and make a joke about it, right? And so that is a thing that we've done quite well for quite some time. So, oh, well, here we go. I think this is probably a good point to kind of
Absolutely.
to segue.
Yeah. So let's talk about AIDS.
Uplifting.
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, this was a time where symbology became very important, especially when it became important for us to communicate nationally about what was going on in our community that was being ignored by our government, being ignored by pretty much everyone, because it was affecting a part of the United States that people didn't necessarily care about.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit of how pins played a role during that period.
Well, when you think about what, especially ACT UP, and I'll really kind of focus in on that. I mean, because they were so effective at what they did. But you think about what drove them there. This number right here. 12,529 deaths before the President of the United States. 5 years into this before he said the damn word. 5 years. And the gay community was the primary at that point in it, right? We were the that was mainly us, right?
Right.
And so, we'll get into it. So they really turned that anger into action, right? So they were tremendous at organizing these spectacular protests that disrupted the flow of work, right? So it's still today, the Golden Gate Bridge has been shut down in protest exactly one time. Before, since, one time. That was in 1990. And there was a group of about 4 dozen, maybe a little bit more, that shut down the Golden Gate Bridge. And in our collection, I didn't bring an example. Oh, no. Yep, there's an example of it in there, of the people that did it created a badge that I did this thing. I shut down the Golden Gate Bridge. And so that was its own symbol of pride. That same group, this is also in San Francisco. My birthday, 1989. That's not the day of my birth, but I was well on my way then. But that day, 1989, they shut down the San Francisco Opera.
Oh, wow.
Right? The season opener of San Francisco Opera, they shut it down. All right. And this was, ostensibly an audience of people that professed to be our friends, to be our supporters.
Absolutely.
Right. Many of our moneyed gay folk in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But the funding wasn't there. Funding wasn't showing up. And that was the big thing. So not only was the government, ignoring it, but they weren't funding the action. Right. And so they inspired a whole range of protest pins. Just a tiny selection you'll see back there, but just the passion. And the thing that you'll notice about it too, and that ACT UP was really successful at this. And you think about certain movements have adopted a color scheme, right? So you could pick out, you would know this is an ACT UP pin, right? You have white text generally, black background, pink triangle, right? Or some inverse combination thereof. Almost always. And so that was really when you kind of see as a movement adopting a color scheme that we hadn't really seen before.
Well, and one of the curious things is that at that same time, you had another extremely powerful symbol that was kind of a reaction to ACT UP. So yes, this is anytime we've seen these major protest movements in our history, and we've had like a local example here as well, to effectively succeed, you have to have one side who is out there in the streets, yelling, laying down, pretending to be dead, covering themselves in blood in front of the CDC. But on the other side of that coin, you had another incredibly powerful symbol with the AIDS quilt.
Yes.
Which each panel designed to be the size of a human coffin. And when you see all of this laid out at the national, on the national lawn, that was kind of the antithesis of ACT UP. You have the shouting, you have the solemnity, but the two of them together are powerful, and they connect with a different audience. Some people react to the anger, some people react to the grief.
Absolutely.
And the humanity. So
and you think about, especially early on, the horror of people with AIDS dying early on. You had funeral homes that wouldn't process the bodies. You had cemeteries that wouldn't allow the bodies to be buried. And so for many of the families and many of the friends and the chosen families of these people who were treated with indignity in death, this was the only memorial they had.
Right.
And so, it is a tremendously emotional thing to see, and the scale of it is
it's staggering.
Staggering.
And on that same note, it was just I'm researching this right now, but I had a conversation with someone. I didn't know this particular piece of history. I did know that certain funeral homes would rejected anyone who'd passed from AIDS, but one of the things I learned locally in Fort Worth, that a few of the only funeral homes that would take these bodies were African American mortuaries. And at this time, and for those of you who don't know, African American queer people of color were not necessarily all that welcome in gay bars. They weren't really welcome anywhere, but gay bars as well, which is crazy to me. I always thought that we became a big Benetton ad after you came out of the closet. Apparently that wasn't true. I was misled. But one of the things that that just blew me away, despite all of this behavior, it was African American mortuaries that were the only places that would take these bodies and process them. So that's something I'm going down a rabbit hole and researching. I got up some specific names. But
I think that's amazing. And it's actually just a quick sidebar to that. Actually listening to Queering the Lone Star State, the episode that you were featured on, which is an amazing podcast.
Oh, does you hear that? Oh, my God.
But, kind of exactly on that note, though, Todd, is when the first Texas gay conference was hosted, it was here in Fort Worth, but it was also by an African-American Lutheran church.
Church, yeah. On the east side, we went over and, Wesley and I went over and visited it, and it was crazy. It's the only place that would allow it to happen. So it's in 1974. Yeah,
I think that's right. Yeah. So allies, right? But it's surprising and sad when you think about, even in amongst oppressed communities, that there is an amount of punching down that happens. Right?
Yeah.
And the gay community is no is no exception to that.
Well, and the right loves to pit us all against each other too. So that was one of the things that I remember happening. The right would constantly go to Black churches and say, gay people are trying to, take your civil rights movement and claim it for themselves. And I was just like, wait, what's going on? No.
Yeah.
It's like, there's equality for all of us. There's plenty. It's not a pie. You don't only get some. And then, everybody else doesn't get the rest. It's like, no, that's not how it works.
Right.
But you had mentioned the rise of the protest movement. So obviously this is something where pens became a huge factor.
Huge factor, right? And so you would have a lot of localized ones that would come out. So you think about, we mentioned today, right? Almost 500 bills have been introduced in state legislatures just this year alone, right? And it was hundreds more last year, and it was a couple hundred the year before that, right? This is never-ending story, but tale as old as time. So we'll go back and look a little bit at some of the early and explicit targeting of our community from an official legislative perspective, right? So where people got out and voted on our rights, right? So, we talked a little bit about Anita. Actually, there's a great poster in the back there that was from an event held in Austin on Auditorium Shores on May 7th of 1978. So she's in the midst of her campaign of hate. And the community decided that, you know what, let's make her feel as unwelcome as possible. Let's throw her an unwelcome party. And so tremendous graphics back there on that one, which I love. But she was, it was successful in Miami-Dade. Then she went straight to places like Eugene, Oregon. Like random little town that had passed a protection ordinance. You know what? Let's go work and try to target those folks. Wichita, Kansas had passed one, and she went there to go undo that. Minneapolis, St. Paul had passed one. She went there to go undo that. Right. So 1977 is when she got that roller coaster started.
Do you know where else she came in Texas? I know Austin and Houston.
Austin and Houston for sure.
Right.
And I can't imagine she didn't come here in Dallas.
I know. I'm trying to figure out if she ever did Dallas Fort Worth.
Yeah. I would be surprised if she didn't. Right. Yeah. And then I'm sorry.
We don't know that she didn't.
We don't know that she didn't.
It's possible. I'm never found.
Yeah. I don't know why. Yeah. If she didn't, I mean, it would surprise me if she didn't. As I guess is what I'm saying is like, because it's a major market. Why wouldn't you?
Right.
Because it's not like necessarily that these two communities were more accepting than Austin or Houston, right? Necessarily. So then you had in 1978, you had the Briggs Initiative that was in the state of California. And this was specifically targeting gay educators, right? To purge them from the schools. And not just teachers, but anyone who worked in the school, anyone who knew of a gay person who worked in the school would be held accountable under this law. And so this is one that we had surprising allies with this, but this is actually the one where Harvey Milk really kind of rose up. You'll see there's an example of a No on 6 campaign button in the back. That is specifically from the group that he ran in the city of San Francisco. Thankfully that failed, but that one we had a really surprising amount of support for it because it was just so absurd. It was so draconian. And there was, it's like some of the laws that we're seeing here today, there's no way to prove it. There's no way that you could just, oh, this person's gay. And then how do they have to disprove it? And so it was such a draconian bill that you even had people like Ronald Reagan even came out against it, of all people. Right. So it was surprising, because it was just so poorly crafted and just far too broad. Then we'll jump to Seattle that same year. This was Initiative 13. And there's not an example of the button back there, but there were just a whole series of buttons that were issued because this one was also rather nasty. It was about it specifically could evict people from their home. You could fire them from their job. You could deny them public services. I mean, everything, right? So this was also a very, very nasty law.
Deny them public services. Gosh, I'm glad something like that couldn't happen today.
Right. And so, yeah, there was a whole series of buttons issued for that. We'll jump forward a little bit. Get to Oregon ballot measure 9. This was also a particularly nasty one that would say the state of Oregon would not only discourage homosexuality, but it would just not recognize it. It doesn't exist. If you ignore it, it'll go away. La, 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 right? That one, thankfully, failed. But there are some tremendous buttons on this one. And I think this was the campaign where we brought, aside from the Anita Bryant campaign, which had a whole lot of sassiness to it, this was some gay sass that we brought to this one, right? To really demonstrate how absurd it was. Then we jump to that. Also, 92 was just a banner year for anti-queer legislation. But Colorado in 1992, they passed Amendment 2, which then overturned, because several municipalities had created some anti-discrimination protection. And this one, in one fell swoop, said there's no local control we usurped that from the local municipalities. Also, sound familiar?
Yeah, really.
Uh,
It's like, oh no, local government knows everything until they do something we disagree with.
yeah, that's right. And then we jumped to the presidential election in 2004. There were 11 states that had anti-marriage equality measures on the bill. I mean, on constitutional amendments on the ballots across the country. 11 states at the same time. So there's no way to collect all of those. There's so many on that. But so it's we talked about it earlier, right? Like it continues. We're still doing this to this day, right? And that 490. It's actually more than 490 at this point.
Wow.
In almost every single state. So that means some states, like Texas, have more than 10. More than 10. And even places like California, right?
Yeah.
They've got them on, that are kind of weaving their way through the docket there. Thankfully, they won't go anywhere. But the fact that it's even happening still today, right? So, I mean, Harvey says it, right? I mean, can't say it any better. And so that's what these pins were, right? It was not only a way of protest, not only a way to speak your mind and be able to visually identify someone and share some solidarity with them, but it was one of the most important things that Harvey, one of his key messages was, you got to come out.
Right.
You got to come out. And staying quiet in the closet won't get anything done.
What does this button say, do you know?
There's one, and you have there is an example of that one in the back there too. So that is this was taken in because he ran for supervisor 3 times. 2 of the times, well, the first 2 times, the first one, and you'll see the examples of all 4 of his campaigns back there. So the first one, this is when he still was looking like a hippie. He had the long hair and the mustache and everything. And so those first 2 times he ran for the board of supervisors, those were at-large positions, right? So you had to win the whole city,
right? And
there's no way that a gay person, openly gay in San Francisco, especially at that time, was going to win citywide. And so when he did win was when there was a change, and that he was active in trying to get that changed. And Mayor Moscone was really keen on this too, is you got to bring district representation, right? So instead of taking all at-large seats, they introduced that year, 1977, they introduced districts.
Mm-hmm.
So the Castro sits in District 5, and that's the button he's wearing back there, and you'll see that back there.
Excellent. So one of the things that we talked about, wearing these buttons at the time wasn't just, a way to let other people know who you were, let them know what they stood for. This was an act of defiance.
Yeah. And
it also came with an element of danger. I mean, if someone was to see some of these buttons, now again, you'll see a lot of the buttons that, especially on the badge of pride table, even today, if you saw someone wearing it, you wouldn't know what it was.
Yeah.
There's a couple over there. I was like, I would never have guessed that was an LGBTQ related button. Right. The Lambda symbol, while the word is Lambda Legal Fund, it still exists. Fort Worth had a Lambda Community Center and the Lambda News publication, but just seeing the symbol, unless you know the Greek alphabet, you wouldn't really know what it was or what it meant. But some of these,
I mean,
some just said like gay power, or
right. Yeah, or you imagine
out of the closet into the streets.
Yeah, you imagine this 1973, 1974, you're walking the streets and you're wearing a button that says freaking fag revolutionary.
Yeah.
That takes that's some bold, that's a bold person right there.
That takes some ovaries.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Say ovaries because they're tougher than balls. Balls are weak.
Yeah. So, I mean, so these were, especially early on, you really were taking a bold stand, right, to wear anything like that in public. And it's kind of wild to think about that it really was in 1970s when you really start to see the proliferation of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you had before Stonewall, and there's an example of this back there as well. Frank Kameny, who was one of the earliest, most prominent gay activists. He actually came here to the first Texas Gay Conference, but he created, and he was inspired by the "Black is Beautiful" slogan, right? And he did "Gay is Good." And he first did that in 1967, 1968. So a full year, at least a full year before Stonewall and before we as a community really started to get organized in 1970s, really when that kind of started happening. So, yeah, you'll see an example of that back there as well, pre-Stonewall. But even kind of before that, you would have, there's a Mattachine Society button back there, which just shows the court jester, right? You see the court jester. Nobody knows what that is, but if you're in the know,
Explain the Mattachine Society just a little bit.
so the Mattachine Society, along with the Daughters of Bilitis, were the earliest sort of organized homophile, is what we called them at the time. It sounds like dentifrice.
I know.
It's such a clinical term. But it was one of the earliest sort of gay groups. I think they had chapters in Kameny did the DC one. There was San Francisco, but they took a more discreet approach,
Right.
And so when the revolutionaries, there's actually a really famous photo right in the wake of the Stonewall uprising, right in the wake of that, the stuff that like early in the quiet, as everybody had to go and rest for the next day of riots, the Mattachine went out there and was basically, hey, we encourage our fellow homosexuals to calm down. It's gonna be okay. Be respectful. That didn't go very well. But
You've seen these protest photos where they're in like a full suit and tie,
yes,
the crew cut and the glasses and everything.
No chance.
No, it's just holding, a tastefully worded sign.
Yeah,
and that was, because that always gets things done.
Yeah.
Respectful protest.
Yeah. So you'll see an example of a Mattachine Society button back there. Actually, 3 of them back there. And before that, even going back into the 50s, so the oldest ones that I've been able to identify, and because these are the hardest ones. So gay motorcycle clubs have been around since the 50s. And so they would issue for themselves like little commemorative buttons on if there was a particular run or a fundraiser or whatever, but they wouldn't have graphics necessarily on it. So you would have to know that the Barbary Coasters were a gay motorcycle group, and this is their 1963 birthday bash, right? Nobody would know that,
right?
But if you're in that group, so.
Well, and you'll see also in the YesterQueer stuff, the Cowtown Leathermen, which is an organization that's turning 40 this year, they donated a great deal of material to YesterQueer, and there are a number of those early motorcycle clubs from organizations all over the country, but also here in Fort Worth. And one of my favorite stories, one of the things that they donated to me, I have a full-size mannequin in my house, so they donated 2 full leather outfits. So I have a full-size mannequin in my living room, decked from head to toe in leather, the straps, the whole deal. And so I had a woman break into my house a couple weeks ago, and I just was really curious what she thought about that when she first entered. Because everybody that walks in my house is like, oh, geez. And she was like, gorked out of her mind on meth, so I'm sure she either loved it or hated it. I don't know. Hoping it was the latter. But we have does anybody have any questions for Adrian about button culture, the history of buttons? Yes.
My favorite. So I didn't bring it with me today. Actually, I'll say I have 2 things. My favorite button, it was issued, and the thing that I love about it is because I know that there are so few of them. but the story behind it. So, as the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activist Alliance were coming together, and I think, Todd, you mentioned that a little bit earlier too. It's like, yeah, we even amongst ourselves, we're not that friendly with each other.
No.
And so even at that time, we found a way to punch down. And so there was an organization that was founded by Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. And it was called STAR. It was an acronym for Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. And it was a beautiful pin. And it was created for them by Randy Wicker. Randy Wicker ran basically a head shop in the Village in New York. And he gave this. He made these for them. He and Marsha were dear friends. And he gave this to them as a fundraiser because they created this organization to help house homeless youth that were gender nonconforming, and so that they would not have to turn to sex work. And so Marsha and Sylvia did the sex work to raise the money, pay the rent on that house. And so it's a beautiful red button, purple and gold star. That's my favorite one. And I like to think that at some point in its history that Sylvia and or Marsha handled that thing. So that's my favorite single item. My other favorite item is actually not a button. I think we're all familiar when you go to certain bars. They'll do like the BOGOs, the buy one get one, happy hour. Here's the thing, give you a token, and and you turn the token back in, you get your second drink, right? I've got one that's from the Upstairs Lounge in New Orleans. And so a place obviously that was a site of tremendous tragedy. And so this was one of those, a little wooden happy hour token from the Upstairs Lounge at 604 Iberville.
Real quickly.
Yeah.
Tell people what the Upstairs Lounge was.
Oh, so the Upstairs Lounge was a gay bar in the French Quarter of New Orleans, located at 604 Iberville. It caught fire by arson. The person locked the door, set the fire in the stairwell, and then it quickly made its way up, trapping dozens of people to a fiery death. And many of these people were throwing their IDs into the fire because they knew they weren't going to get out, but they didn't want to be identified. That's how gross and tragic the time was. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good question. There were actually a handful of manufacturers, Donnelly Colt, NG Slater. There was a handful of them that would produce these en masse for these organizations at an extremely low cost, especially Donnelly Colt. So they would do the ones for ACT UP virtually free. Mm-hmm. And so that's also why they were able to make so many of them, because ACT UP wasn't raising any money. Right. They weren't raising money to, make buttons. They were raising money to get people fed, get people medicated, all that kind of stuff. So there were some manufacturers that were helpful in that way. But generally some were donated, or some like Randy Wicker, the ones for Marsha, he made for them. So he was a button maker himself. And so he made them for them. And so it was just kind of a mix. Yeah. But the ones that you'll see, especially as you get into the organized campaigns where we're going through the dates there, because you would be dealing with political action committees. So these groups would form PACs to raise funds to fight these various legislation. They had to officially pay for them. So you'll see them; they'll be labeled "paid for by XYZ PAC."
Oh wow!
And so then you see that's really organizations starting to pay for them themselves. Yeah. And then there were also a handful, a lot of the great kind of just sassy kind of slogan buttons. There was a tremendous feminist retailer out of New Jersey. They were called Fern Sales and Manufacturing. They produced, I mean, they were prolific. They cranked these things out, and they, were sold as fundraisers for during the ERA fight, the Equal Rights Amendment fight. They were raising, they were cranking these things out to raise funds for that, and then also, as feminist identity, and then they also they kind of morphed into, not morphed into, they just kind of added into, bringing, kind of gay slogans into that. There's also another company. It was run by, I'm forgetting her name right now, but she is a lesbian artist. She started a company called White Mare in New York, in upstate New York, and she produced some beautiful, beautiful pins early on. So I don't know how I got down that path, but we're talking about manufacturers.
Just as an asterisk to what when you were talking about the upstairs lounge, Robert Kamina, who's a Dallas filmmaker, who many of you may know as the director of Raid of the Rainbow Lounge, about the bar down the street that used to be down the street. His second documentary was called Upstairs Inferno, which was about, if you haven't seen it, it's a good one to go and watch. I believe it is still the biggest gay mass murder in history
until Pulse.
Until Pulse, yeah. Pulse, broke that record. Cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, Dan.
Oh, big, absurdly big. Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, so there was a bar, a show bar in Honolulu called Glade, and they were drag performers, and the law at the time specified that you had to be wearing, an appropriate amount of gender clothing, right?
Like the same law here in Fort Worth, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
So the exception to that rule, they got around that by they produced for the performers a pin that Glade gave to the performers that said, "I'm a boy." Right. And so there was that. But as a souvenir, as it caught on, they made a giant one that is it's over 6 inches.
Oh, wow.
Right. Just a huge thing. And it has the cast of the show cast at that time. Show bar in Honolulu.
Do you have one of those?
I do.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you have more than 10,000 buttons. And again, we've talked a lot about some of the ones here, but you have buttons from literally all over the world, right?
That's right.
So foreign language buttons, all kinds of different things. And it's like, how are you accumulating things like that?
Well, again, it's the beauty of travel and the internet and writing letters and kind of posting on forums and that sort of thing, right? So a handful of but one of them that's a really cool one. We were lucky enough to be in New York in 2019 for Stonewall 50. And there was a special exhibit that was put up by the tourist board of Taiwan. And Taiwan, just before then, had the distinction of becoming the first country in Asia to have marriage equality.
Right.
But they achieved that through court, by winning a court battle, just like we did, right? But they had passed. There had been a marriage equality referendum the year prior to that, and so in a place where you don't expect people to wear their politics on their person and show it to people as they're walking by, we have 2 buttons that were issued for the failed marriage equality referendum in Taiwan. And I got those by just talking to the people that were doing the exhibit. They had a display, and they were part of the display, and they were like, "Oh, we don't want to have to carry this back, so here you go." And but then I've got some stuff from. So if you've seen BPM 120, which is it's a film about ACT UP Paris. Fabulous film, but have a great collection of ACT UP Paris items, as well as particularly during the fight against Section 28 in the UK, which targeted us there, and that was active up through the 90s. So just and it's just a simple matter of finding people and talking to them. So it's kind of sleuthing on the internet who's who.
You're not like haunting eBay every day.
No, oh my God, I'd be. I have to do multiple mortgages on my house.
Absolutely, yeah.
No, because some of the stuff you see on eBay, he's like, no, because some of the stuff you see on eBay is just absurdly expensive.
I've seen them for $45 to $50 a piece, if not more. Sometimes.
Yeah. So any of the Harvey Milk stuff is absurdly expensive. When you can go to the LGBT Historical Society in San Francisco, and they do an annual auction, and they have a stockpile of these things.
Right, they have multiples.
And they have them a stockpile of them, and they do them in their fundraising auction, way cheaper than you can find it on eBay.
Yeah.
So,
anybody else have any questions before we wrap up?
And I would say one kind of thing too. Just trying to think about how best to phrase this, right? So you think about the power of these items. They really kind of lost the power a little bit when you started slapping corporate logos on the rainbow on a pin. It just cheapens the whole thing, right? And so like the modern stuff, unless it's specifically related to a protest,
right?
It doesn't make it into
the collection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But anyway, that's that, because there's so many. We were just at the Pride down in Fair Park, and there were just tons and tons and tons. But like, I'm not going to get a Olive Garden rainbow. So
when you're here, your family.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No disrespect to Olive Garden, but I'm not gonna do that. All right. Yeah.
All right. Yes. Okay.
It was like a hand. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because there is emotion, there is protest, and that is at the heart of what Badge of Pride is about, is making sure that we are capturing that spirit and celebrating it and finding ways to pass it on. So yeah, absolutely. And I love some of my favorite things too, are some of the like homemade items, right? These are, you don't get more grassroots than that, right? Someone declaring their identity, someone declaring their own position. That's some of my favorite stuff. Exactly. Yeah. Cause all you see back there, that's the lack of money. Hey, but nobody had money back then, right? Yeah. All right.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Once again, big hand for my guest tonight, Adrian Cardwell.
Thank you.
I want to give everyone who wore the buttons. I can't tell you how much it means to me, but this is something. It's weird that it's become something so recent. Yeah. But I can't tell you how happy it makes me that I've met so many people now who are so passionate about our history. And the thing I love about looking out at the crowd tonight, when I first started YesterQueer, and it began as a Facebook discussion group during COVID. I was really, when I wanted to start these discussion groups, I was hoping to get older folks to come out and tell their stories, and I didn't know if younger people would care. And every YesterQueer we've had a great mix of young and old, people who are interested in learning where we came from. And as you guys have heard, talking about these subjects, there's nothing new under the sun. We've been down this road before, and I told the crowd last night, the best way to know where we're going is to understand where we've been and how we fought these fights before and how we won them before.
That's right.
But once again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. I want to thank Jenna Higgs-Hill, the owner of Liberty Lounge, and of course, all our amazing staff at Liberty Lounge. By the way, the taco truck is open, I believe. Yes? Vern? Yes? All right, cool. So if you guys want to grab a snack out there, please do. Also want to thank my technical director, Kyle Trentham, for making everything sound and look good, as well as Andrew for helping us put it out on the internet for everyone to see. We will see you next month. Thanks for coming.